And what is up, YouTube? My name is G3 Iron, and today we are talking about trickling economics. This is not going to be a discussion about trickle-down economics and tax breaks for the wealthy that was popularized by President Reagan, the United States president in the 80s. What this is going to actually be about is about trickle down, trickle up, and trickle up across economics, which are concepts that we're actually going to learn about and use from the fashion industry and from some fashion history. Those are some things that we're going to learn about today, and how those concepts interact with, or rather, how those concepts reveal some very telling aspects about path of exile economics. And of course, we're going to take a look at some examples right here in our very, very beloved own league, our present league at the moment, which is Betrayal League. So we'll take a look at some examples about how these different concepts, trickle up, trickle down, and trickle across economics, play out in path of exile. Thanks so much for everybody for voting in the community poll. Of course, we're going to have those up on a regular basis now. We use straw poll to gauge y'all's feedback and what you want to talk about, what you want to interact with. And so this was one of the things that I know people have been asking for a couple of weeks now, and I'm so excited to dive into it because it gave me a chance to do some research in an area that I otherwise wouldn't have done. And so I'm always most excited, and you probably can tell when I'm most excited to talk about something and share about something, because I had to learn about it, and by getting to learn about it myself, it's just exciting. It's exciting to learn new things, and PoE is such an exciting experience, both as a game as well as an economy and as a community, because there's constantly new things to learn about. So without further ado, Trickling Economics, how player decisions shape the overall economy of Path of Exile. Starting off, we're going to talk about this trickle-down effect, lessons from fashion and culture. So somebody named von Jhering was a German fashionista, as it were, actually an author, anyway, and came up with this theory. So let's dive into a couple of quotes. The French sociologist Émile Durkheim summarizes von Jhering's theory that according to von Jhering, this author of fashion, fashion is the result of the need for superior classes to distinguish themselves on the outside, i.e. through their appearance, from inferior classes. Because on the one side, the latter constantly tend to imitate the former, fashion spreads in society by means of contagion. Oh man, this person from, when is this, 1904-ish or late 1800s is already excited to be playing Contagion ED Trickster. Anyway, but on the other side, because it lost all its value once it is adopted by everybody, it, being fashion, is condemned by its very nature to renew itself continuously. All right, so we've got this concept of fashion, or that thing which is desirable. We don't have to be thinking in terms of clothes here. For just a moment, I understand that the words here are fashion and the concepts come from fashion. But for a moment, let's just expand our minds and learn and try and think outside of the box about how this can possibly apply to PoE. So people want stuff that sets them apart. Okay, whether that be a class or a item or a currency, right? Sound familiar? So folks love to show off, especially, of course, us gamers. We love to show off our cool loot. And Path of Exile, and indeed the entire action RPG genre, revolves, and you might say the world goes round in the action RPG genre, with this concept at play, that people like to show off the cool stuff that they have. And of course, once everybody has adopted or acquired that cool thing, well, then it's no longer really the cool thing anymore, right? It moves on once mass adoption has taken place. So the trickle-down effect. This is a wonderful slide, and I've linked the origin to this slide. This slide is not from me, but I've linked the origin to it down below. It's always important to me to quote as much as possible whenever we can, and we're in the age of the internet, so we ought to be able to quote original authors with their work, so that link is provided down below. So there are three styles of this trickle-down, trickle-up, and trickle-across. Three sorts of theories going on here. So trickle-up theory states that fashion, and we'll we'll get to how this applies to POE, but you can think of it in this regard for now for the definition, that trickle-up theory is a theory of fashion, how it suggests that the flow of fashion moves upwards from the poor to the wealthy, or from the lower class to the upper class. It's the opposite of the trickle-down effect, pertaining to the theory that change in information moves upward in a hierarchy. So this would say that the mass market actually dictates what people who are in the wealthier or more well-to-do status would use in Path of Exile terms, or would wear in fashion terms. Trickle-down theory states that fashion begins at the top of the class structure and spreads downward slowly through the class structure. The people of the upper class display their wealth by participating in an extravagant lifestyle, including wearing apparel made of expensive modes of production and using costly materials. One person's style is towards imitation, the other is towards differentiation. This is so key, right? And it is so prevalent in Path of Exile. Bear with me, we've got one more definition. Trickle across theory. The trickle across theory is the hypothesis that states that fashion acceptance begins amongst several social classes at the same time. There are fashion leaders in all groups. Members of each social group look at the leaders of their own group for fashion trends. We'll get to this in just a moment, but right now, as you're watching on YouTube, you're actually interacting on a particular trend, and you're looking for information, trying to follow a trend that actually follows one of these theories, either trickle-up theory, trickle-down theory, or trickle across theory. So how do these come into play for Path of Exile? So levels of, rather than the fashion market, it's the POE market. You've got your trickle up, which suggests that the flow of economic value moves upwards from the poor to the wealthy, or from the lower class to the upper class. So we're mid-league right now in Betrayal, and trickle up theory would suggest that there are mechanisms by which people who have less currency and less gear can actually influence people who have more currency and more gear, whereas trickle-down theory would suggest that the flow of economic value moves downwards from the wealthy to the poor. So in other words, things that the wealthy are doing, everybody else wants to do. Hey, that sounds familiar. I think we've got a meme for that in POE. Oh, that's right. We call it the Mathel effect, right? We've actually got our own lingo to describe what trickle-down theory looks like in POE. Trickle across theory suggests that the flow of economic value begins among several classes simultaneously, with economic leaders among various groups. I can't think of a better example than this than Twitch and the streaming and the YouTubing community that exists, as well as guilds. As soon as one or two players start to simultaneously interact with a new league mechanic, let's say for instance, then we've got lots of different people all over the place who aren't necessarily following trends from one or another, or following a trend either as that part of that mass market that is pushing a trend up to people who are maybe have more currency or more gear, and nor is it trickle down where people who have more currency and more gear are forcing a meta or a fashion trend or an economic trend on the rest of the masses, but rather this is everybody at the same time is simultaneously exploring and getting excited and pushing the economic flow and the decisions of people involved in the economy all at the same time. This is trickle across theory for lack of any other example. This is the best example that I could think of, and it just fits it so well. It's a league start. Trickle across theory is the start of a new league where everyone is figuring stuff out simultaneously at the same time, and different leaders emerge in different groups, whether they're on Twitch, whether they're on YouTube, or whether they're just in guild chat or even in global chat, as people are discovering new things about the league or unveiling things about the league, as in the case of Betrayal. We all start to discover this stuff together and push the flow of the economic movement that will be the trends in that particular league. So that's trickle up, trickle down, and trickle across theory, quickly summarized. So trickle up theory, some more examples and some impacts displayed from the plebs to the pogs, as it were. This is trickling up. So this is saying that the flow of the economic value inside the present ecosystem of currency in Path of Exile and of value is going to flow from the masses up the chain towards the wealthy. So the definition is that trickle up happens in a couple distinct scenarios that mostly surround item level. Okay, item level, usually around item level. Sometimes it's just around currency, but a lot of the time it's around item level. Because as more and more players gain access to higher item levels, the economy shifts because the greater amount of supply simply floods. right? Because there are more and more people who are interacting with goods that are at higher eye level. And so therefore there is this massive push that if you want to maintain your status as somebody wealthy, the bottom of the economy, the mass market of the economy, is essentially pushing you to do more. So this is where a trend is that the plebs are actually pushing the pogs to change the way how they're interacting with the economy. One example of this is, of course, low-level farming zones. So like Betrayal safe house farming, darkness farming in Delve. A couple of ways that this works, right? So we've got people at the top end of the economy that don't necessarily want to sit around and do Betrayal safe house farming right now in Betrayal League. Or we've got folks at the top end of the economy that don't necessarily want to run around on a darkness farmer through Delve. So what do? Well, they've got a bunch of extra currency on hand, and they are happy to pay prime currency, and even higher than the average going rate, for bulk amounts of goods from people who are willing to run multiple instances over and over and over again, whether that's low-level darkness farming or whether that's low-level Betrayal safe house farming. Either one works. So this is where the mass market of tons of people that are willing to interact with low-end content are actually shaping the way how top-end content can be accessed. Because those players at the top end of the economic pyramid, that is the POE economy, don't have to run Betrayal safe houses in order to get their breachstones, for instance, or they don't have to run a bunch of low-level delves in order to get their fossils. It means they can simply spend their time in delve and top-end delves or in top-end mapping, acquiring item bases to then enchant using those fossils that they will purchase, or conversely, running those top-end pure breachstones in order to push their character to the next level, or even offering services because they've got the excess currency to buy up all those breachstones, which we'll get into more here in a little bit. But this is trickle-up economics from the plebs to the pogs, how mass market low-level farming is actually pushing up what people who have got more currency are able to interact with and do in the economy. So the impact on the economy is that players that can push the highest, most expensive content don't want to run low-level zones, and some of the motivations for this being maybe challenge or progression or fresh content. That's from the POG's perspective. Whereas the economic impact on the economy for players that do farm these zones, i.e. the plebs, find reliable customers who need specific tradable items, i.e. those pogs, and thus provide a viable revenue stream that's consistent. So motivations here for the plebs is that they've got constant currency coming in at a consistent rate with a low level of challenge. Maybe you've got YouTube pulled up, maybe you've got Netflix pulled up, maybe you're watching your favorite streamer, all while you're darkness farming or Betrayal safe house farming. These are easy, sessionable returns that you can measure and say, hey, look, I'm going to sit down and watch a few episodes of my favorite show, and when I'm done, I'm going to have X number of chaos that I can then go and buy an upgrade for my character on. That is a wonderful, wonderful example of trickle-up economics inside Path of Exile. So moving on to trickle-down economics. This is from the pogs to the plebs. This is showing that there is also examples of flow in the economic environment of Path of Exile, where people at the top end are making decisions, and those decisions are impacting the rest of us down at the bottom. So the definition is that POE, trickle down, happens mostly due to scarcity mixed with demand. So some examples of this are people to get to the first of something. So on the Sunday, and I remember at least U.S. time it was Sunday, on the Sunday that the Lore Weave recipe was discovered and it went public, I remember I spent about 8 hours just flipping unique rings, and it was great. It was amazing. Nonetheless, I was, yes, one of the early adopters, but I wasn't the first. Whoever it was that first figured out how to do the Lore Weave recipe, and maybe they figured it out before that Sunday. I just know that Sunday, that was the Sunday that it blew up and it went out on Reddit and people figured it out on YouTube and on Twitch. Maybe somebody had it figured out long before then, but when that recipe went out, it was amazing. And whoever was first to that recipe made huge bank because they just went and bought up a bunch of unique rings and then sold them all as lore weaves, making a ton of profit. Another example of this, being the first person who figured out betrayal blocking, that would have made tons of money this league because you would have been farming all of those breachstones, you would have been interacting with all of those scarabs, and you would have had an exclusive way to be the first person to get a massive amount of currency and of tradable goods that are relatively scarce because you figured out a way to make it unscarce for you, but the demand is still really high because the mass market hasn't adopted interacting with it yet. So this makes you a POG, essentially, because you've got control, or at least knowledge that gives you control over a particular market by being one of the firsts to something. And of course, this happens every single league at a league start, where people start a league, and certain players who push their atlas very, very fast are able to be the first to accomplish certain boss kills like Uber Lab carries or Breachstone farming. And then, of course, my favorite example being mirror tier gear. This is the ultimate example of differentiation, of the wealthy showing off. There's literally forum sections where people who have crazy amounts of wealth can go and say, look, this is the best item for this particular slot available in the game, and you can pay me handsomely to have a copy of it. I mean, that is the definition of fashion, right? Of showing off something that differentiates something that you've got from what someone else has got. So the impact on the economy is that crafting methods and specific market strategies are closely guarded by an upper class who make a massive profit, who have access to this early on. And it doesn't necessarily have to be tied to a timetable with a league. It could be, and we've seen this sometimes, where some people at the end of a league, like Bestiary, for those of you who have been around in Path of Exile long enough to remember Bestiary League, at the end of Bestiary League, there were two particular people who came out and who shared some very specific crafting methods that they had come up with. And they made so much money. They made multiple mirrors, several mirrors, where they were basically able to control an entire market, and nobody else throughout almost the entire league of Bestiary. I believe it was the last week of Bestiary, right before everything went to standard, that these two different players came out and shared their particular crafting strategies and what they were doing. And it was ridiculous, the profit that they were able to make, because they had simply cornered a market on a particular piece of knowledge. And so they were the firsts to something, but they were also the onlys to something. They were the upper class by far, that league, and had a massive impact on the economy, those decisions that those players had. So another impact on the economy, as these methods and strategies are disseminated or discovered by others, the margin for profit eventually shrinks. One of the best things that you can do if you want to learn how to make money in Path of Exile and follow specific trades, okay? I've said this tip before, and I'll say it again, I'm sure, after this video, but one of the best things you can do is you can go find people who are selling mirrors on the trade sites. And you might say, Iron, I don't have a mirror, though. I don't have a bunch of exalts. Why would I want to go and find somebody who's selling mirrors? Go and look at the accounts who are selling mirrors, and then simply using the trade tab, go sort what things they have listed and what price they have things listed. I now have a practice based on this where I simply always have at least one tab set to buy out at one exalted, and I throw all of my jewels into that tab. Everything that I find, identified, unidentified, doesn't matter. When I first start out, I always throw all my jewels in there. And I learned this from following a guy for a whole league that did this similar strategy, where he would simply throw all sorts of gear. It didn't matter if it was valued at an exalted or not. It didn't matter if it was worth it. He simply threw it all for an exalt into a buyout only stash tab. Because for him, if somebody was going to buy it out for an exalt, well, that's worth stopping whatever it is that he's doing in order to make that trade. And if it's not, well, it probably wasn't worth his time to identify it, craft it, interact with it anyway. It was amazing. You would be shocked at the amount of items that I have sold that I've looked at and gone, huh? Why is this selling for an exalt? Maybe there's a really niche build that needs those specific stats. Maybe you're the only person online with that specific thing. But the point of this being that there are specific strategies that you can learn about, and once you learn about those strategies, it opens up your world, and also thereby, because it opens up your world, it also eventually cuts in on the profit margin on other people who are also practicing those strategies. The people at the end of Bestiary League who disseminated, who shared those couple of different crafting recipes that they had figured out and were using all league. Once it was figured out, it was the end of Bestiary League. Bestiary was going away. It didn't come back until this league itself here in Betrayal, and it's in a much different iteration now. It's much more improved, but those crafting recipes aren't even available at this point in time. So those people realized and knew that as they were sharing that information, it wouldn't hurt them over the long run, because that knowledge, that special knowledge that made them a part of the wealthy and elite Pogs of the economy of Bestiary, they would never lose out on that profit because those crafts wouldn't be available ever again. So that's trickle down. What's trickle across? From plebs, by plebs, for plebs. So the definition in POE. In POE, trickle across happens as leaders in various economic classes make discoveries regardless of their initial starting point. So examples of this, as I mentioned, are Twitch, YouTube, forum posting, guildmates, forums, independent opinions that form into a meta. This is when several different people, right, all at the same time might have similar ideas, right? You may have heard that phrase, great minds think alike. Well, this is true in Path of Exile. You've got millions of different players that are all trying out different things. This sort of phenomenon happens all the time, especially on the forums and on the POE subreddit, where people are interacting with one another and one or two people post something, and then all of a sudden everybody's posting about it, right? As soon as that information gets out, that would be trickle down economics, is that as soon as the information gets out, everybody else adopts it. This is where lots of different people are all discovering things at the same time because they're all actually playing the game at the same time. One quick example of this is whenever the servers go down, right, we all discover that independently at the same time. We're not checking Twitter to see on a daily basis or checking the server status on a daily basis to see if the servers are up. You simply log into the game and you play the game and you know the servers are up. But when the servers all go down, we're all discovering that at the same time when we're in game and the servers go down. Another example of this that's more economically related: as soon as a league starts and there is new currency that is available in a league, like in Betrayal, where we've got all sorts of wonderful goodies in the form of scarabs that are now available. Well, as different players all across the wide spectrum all interact with scarabs, it's possible for lots of different people to all discover the same thing simultaneously. As people form those opinions eventually then get shared across the economy, and that's what forms a meta in trickle across economics. So the impact on the economy is that players can find themselves as either buyers or sellers in whatever the meta forms. Now, that might sound incredibly basic, but at the same time, it's really, really helpful to think about when you think about your own position in an economy. Are you a buyer or are you a seller for the things that are in demand and the things that have supply in the league presently? So, for instance, in Betrayal League, you can ask yourself this very simple question right now. Are you a supplier of scarabs or are you a buyer of scarabs? Now, you might say, I'm neither. I'm not buying scarabs and I'm not supplying them. All right, that's fine. You're simply not interacting with something that has very, very high demand this league, so you're missing out on part of the meta that is going on with the economy. If you answer yes to either of those two questions, though, that you are either a buyer or a supplier, then you found out that you are in fact involved in this meta and you are constantly trying to change your position in that meta of either a buyer or a supplier based on the profitability of your own characters, of your own setup, and your own motivations as a player, whether or not being a supplier or a buyer is more fun for you. So the impact on the economy is that profit margins are most likely smaller for profits the longer the meta lasts. This is true, of course, for lots of different reasons. Of course, there's simply more supply that gets entered into the economy every single day as more and more players adopt the position of becoming suppliers. As less and less top-end players play the league, as less and less wealthy players play the league, there are less buyers, which then means there's less demand, which then, of course, starts to even the scales out between supply and demand. So over time, in general, there are exceptions to this, but over time, in trickle across economic examples from plebs, by plebs, and for plebs, eventually over time, profit margins even out. Doesn't mean that eventually they break even and they go no profit, but it simply means that they'll come down from where they originally were. All right, so to sum up, down, and across. So to sum up, trickle-up theory says that the economic flow of any particular league moves from the plebs through the middle class to the Pogs. Trickle-down theory states that the economic flow of a league goes from the Pogs down through the middle class to the plebs. It disseminates out and originates from the Pogs. And then trickle-across theory says everybody's interacting with one another and shaping one another's view of the meta and of the economy simultaneously. So here's an example right here in Betrayal 3.5 of how a meta was actually born. the softcore race to 100 and what we can learn about it from economic trends. So, breachstones right now are the way to get to a level 100 in Path of Exile. It doesn't mean it's the only way. It simply means that if you have enough funds, it is going to be the fastest way to power level your character to level 100. That is the general accepted thesis or general accepted meta of what's going on right now in Path of Exile and 3.5 Betrayal League. So lots of people are asking themselves, are they a supplier or are they a buyer? You can be pushing to level 100 yourself and offering it as a service. This is a prevailing place of breachstones in 3.1 or 3.5. And of course, we're going to take a look at a Reddit thread from this race to 100. So this is linked down below because, of course, we can always give credit. We're in the age of the internet. It's easy to click on a hot link. This is a post from Nomic right at the end of the softcore 100 race. This is the winning team that got to level 100 in Betrayal League first. This team figured out, I'm going to summarize it here. We're not going to read all of this, but this team figured out that breachstones were the way to go in the XP per hour and not simply pushing through maps. They figured it out. When they figured this out, not only did they simply buy up the breachstones for themselves so that way they could be using it and benefit, but they also purchased all of the breachstones so that way they would control the market from their opponents who were also racing to level 100. This is a great write-up. If you want to spend some time reading it, I highly, highly recommend. If you're interested in racing, but then also if you're interested in the economics and the power that goes on behind player decisions in shaping the entire economy of a league, highly recommend that you read it. So sheep will follow. That's the basic principle here. Once one player from Nomic's group figured out and discovered that the XP per hour benefits of running pure breachstones were better than anything else in the game, one group, i.e. Nomic's team, then pushed for level 100 using this discovery of pure breachstones, which then led to other racers and motivated players then began to use and view pure breachstones as the most efficient way to get to level 100. We now have a meta being born, right? We've got trickle down economics, we've got trickle up economics, and then we've got trickle across economics. All three of these things are happening at the same time. Some players then begin farming pure breachstones for profit, some for use, and some for service sales. We've got a full-fledged economy. Why? Because one dude in one racing team group said, hey guys, this is some better XP on here. Amazing. That one discovery has now shaped the entire way every single person pushing for level 100 this league is playing the game. So we now have a full-fledged 3.5 meta based around this discovery of efficient farming, and that's found by a single player on opening weekend. That is awesome and a great example of how different fashion principles, but of trickle down, trickle up, and trickle across economics all play out inside the Path of Exile economy. So, what are your thoughts? Does the flow of the Path of Exile economy have a tendency to trickle up, down, or across? Leave us a comment down below. I love interacting with your comments. I love to get back to as many of them as I can, and I'm so thankful that so many of you are interacting and bringing up wonderful, awesome talking points and even thinking about things that we haven't chatted about in videos. I absolutely love it. So, what are your thoughts? Do you think that the Path of Exile economy has a general tendency to do any one of these three things: trickle up, trickle down, or trickle across? Second question for you all today: how do you make decisions about how to progress your own goals? So the team that pushed for level 100 in Softcore Betrayal League viewed their goal of getting to 100 first. They prioritized that, everything else be damned, right? Which meant currency went out the window. And in the write-up, Nomic actually writes, at one point, we were purchasing breachstones at way above their current market rate because we simply wanted to buy them all up and deny our opponents from getting them. So how do you make decisions about how to progress in your own goals? If you're looking for, let's say, an item upgrade, are you simply going to continue playing that character until you've naturally farmed enough currency? Are you going to swap onto another character like a low-level farming character in order to interact with Betrayal or delve farming? How do you make decisions about how to progress your own goals in a league? And then lastly, what influences your choices for builds and your goals and your motivations in playing PoE? What influences you? What trickles down to influence you? Are you a member of the Mathel effect? Do you watch a streamer? Do you check out this channel? Do you check out others? Do you watch Twitch? Are you interacting on the forums or on Reddit or watching Global or Trade Chat? What influences you as you are making choices for your next character to play, for your next goal to set for yourself, or even your next motivation that gets you excited for playing Path of Exile? Let us know your thoughts down below in the comments. I always appreciate you commenting on the videos and love interacting with you all as we follow up and chat. Thanks so much for watching. Let me know your thoughts down below. And as always, I hope that today is the day that a Mirror of Calandra drops for you.